Hello and welcome to Get Informed, America, the show that breaks through the mainstream media box to bring you real smart news. Hi, I'm Dave Okenquist, and joining me is the editor of Informed American, contributor to WallStreetWireNews.com, all-around great guy, and the smartest man I know, Mr. Rodney Johnson. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm well, Dave. How are you?
I am great. Rodney, you were before we started, you were saying how pleasant the weather is in Texas. Did you get any of the rain effect from the hurricane that hit Louisiana?
No, that hurricane was fairly small and in the shape of it, and it moved really fast. It was moving 55 miles an hour last time I looked, which is stunningly quick for a hurricane. So it just kind of blew right by.
And what are the current temperatures in Texas right now, Rodney?
Well, I mean, I'm near the coast, and it was 48 degrees when I ran this morning.
Oh, wow.
And the wind was blowing, 6 to 8. And so it was really very pleasant, very, very clear. So we're getting shots of that cold air that went through the mountains last week and brought so much snow to the Colorado mountains.
Interesting. So it's not nearly that cold here, but it is a chilly 68 degrees this morning. So you put on, we're here in the Tampa area. So you feel anything under 70, you feel, which is funny. And everybody laughs at us, but hey, that's where we are. Speaking of Florida and, some might argue Texas, these may be battleground states in the 2020 election, which is, it felt so far away, Rodney, and now it's just a couple of days or a few days away. Here we are. I mean, this is our final show before the election, so I thought it would be good for you and I to pull up the old Electoral college map and pick our states, make our final predictions. What do you think about that?
Let's do it. I mean, I am so happy this is the last show. Hopefully, let's do this. Hopefully, the last show we're going to talk about this, and we don't have a contested election, which we're talking about next Friday. So anyway, let's get to it.
Okay, let's just deal with that if it comes. Now let's not dwell on that very irritating possibility. So I've got 270towin.com. By the way, if you're watching along, go ahead, and I'd love you to play along as well, because it is kind of a game, really, because this is a guess, but we're going to do our best. And let us know how our predictions jive with yours, where we're right, where we're wrong, and maybe if you can screenshot a map or something like that and share it down in the comments below. So let's head into here. This is, again, 270towin.com. Now, what we're looking at here is their 2020 consensus map. We have the dark blue, which is the obvious Biden wins, and the dark red corresponding the same for Trump. And then, the different color shading to different level of certainty, I guess, to who's going to win. But really, though, when you look at this, despite all the myriad of shades, it's really going to come down to just a few states, right, Rodney?
Yep.
Great. So let's start here with my home state of Florida. President Trump and Joe Biden, I believe, were here just last night. So trying to shore up support. Where does Florida go, Rodney?
I think Florida goes for Trump.
Okay. So we got Florida, obviously. You're not. I did a video because there was a poll that came out that showed Biden +3 in Texas. We're not there, right?
I think Texas goes for Trump. I think it's close, but I think it still goes for Trump.
Okay. What do you got for Georgia?
I think Georgia goes for Trump.
Okay. And so the next closest one would be, or the next bigger one, really the big one that Trump absolutely needed, and I think every Republican president has needed, is Ohio. Where's Ohio going?
I think Ohio goes for Biden.
Oh, wow. And Iowa?
I think Iowa goes for Trump.
North Carolina. That's the remaining toss-up state here on this map.
I think it goes for Biden.
Oh, wow. Okay, we can see where this is going. Oh, there is a Maine District 2. Here.
I don't know. I would call it for Trump just because I don't know it very well. And the rural areas of Maine tend to be very conservative. So we'll see.
Okay. Before we head to the Midwest, let's go to Arizona, because that seems to be the one out west that's most contentious, unless you think there's something in Nevada. But what do you got for Arizona?
I think Trump pulls out Arizona.
Okay. Do you want to, Nevada is the other one. So where do you choose that?
I think Nevada goes for Biden.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't even know if that one's really a battleground. Now, this map, that's your election. So your total goes 312 for Biden, 226 for Trump. That's a very plausible map, Rodney.
Thank you.
I'm going to dip out of this just for a second.
Now wait a second. So it's not worth anything, right? So for what it's worth, put that down. I was at 312,226.
Yep. Got it. Yep.
So we've got that. It's recorded. And when I'm completely wrong next week, I'll be the first one to say, guess what? It was worth nothing anyway, but you go ahead. Let's see.
And I'll preface before I get into my map. My level of certainty here is not very high.
Right.
And don't believe anyone that has a high level of certainty. I can see this thing.
Neither one of us are putting our entire net worth on the line in Vegas over this.
No, I did not mortgage my house on this or something like that. But I did want to mention, because this I think speaks to this point, which is something I talked to our viewers about this week, is that I think call it 50-50. Americans are split and they're living in two realities. And reality number one is that the polls are either right or close enough to being right, and which would indicate a strong Biden win, which I think is where you're at here, although you have some splits. And then the second reality is that the polls are massively wrong, and that there's basically a 50-50 chance for both candidates in reality number two. So I would say you're living in reality number one. You're a numbers guy, and I think that's borne out. Well, would you agree with that assessment about Americans living in the two realities? And depending on the results of the election, this could be very troubling for either side that loses, because they've been sort of living in their own realities.
So I don't think people remain static, and clearly some pollsters were quite wrong in 2016, obviously. But when you're a pollster, you live and die by your ability to do this well. And so the same pollsters that were wrong in 2016, they're not just going into this blindly in 2020 and saying, gee, I hope it's right this time. What they've done is adjust their models to account for people who are perhaps not telling them exactly, what they think. And it goes to people who also won't respond to the models or to the calls. Yeah. And so there's a lot that goes into this, trying to account for people's biases, points of view, ways of doing things, whatever you want to call it. And the pollster, I wish I could remember his name, who got it right in 2016, he described it in a great way. He said, you go to a retirement community and you ask people if they watch Jerry Springer, and you're going to get one number. If you go to the cable company and ask them how many people in that neighborhood watch Jerry Springer, you're going to get another number. And so what you have is this kind of people who are like, well, I don't really watch it, but then again, their television seems to be on it every week. And so the point is, people who are shy Trump voters, as they've been called, perhaps are not telling people willingly, or just not answering the phone call. And so you have this bias built in. That is a background. I think this is widely recognized. It's not a big surprise. And so I think people have tried to account and adjust for that coming into this year.
Now, it used to be that a national poll would be very indicative of how things would play out over the various states, but that seems to have changed a little bit. Now, is this a Trump phenomenon, or is this a society-wide phenomenon where people are more resistant to, like you said, give answers, or is it, in other words, has something changed, or what? Why does it seem like, and it's not just in the United States, by the way, they got Brexit wrong. Even many elections around the world we're missing voters that were going to turn out that they did not expect. What do you?
I don't think they're. I think this is. I had a professor in college, Professor Drums, who coined a great phrase in my world, which is a BGO, a blinding glimpse of the obvious, and I have used that term for all of my professional career. I think this is a BGO where when the mainstream media, when the news every night, and the people standing on the street corner are yelling and screaming that you're an awful, terrible human being if you support the other side, people are going to be less likely to go out and say, hey, I'm one of those. I'm a terrible guy, right? And so what I think you have is people who support the other side looking at it and going, well, my convictions tell me to support it, but my common sense says don't say it out loud all the time. And so I don't don't think there's anything surprising about this. Brexit, I mean, most everybody except, now Farage and a couple of others were screaming that, hey, you don't want to be supporting Brexit because if you do, you're a troglodyte and you don't understand the world economy and you're an idiot and you're going to set back, Great Britain by 100 years. Yeah. And the people are like, I really don't want to be under the thumb of the European Union anymore. So I think you've got that going on here too. You had it in 2016. I think you've got it more now.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. So let's move on. That's good analysis there, Rodney. And well done on your map. So let's now it is my turn here. Now I fall. I'll admit, I'm more in reality number 2 person. I don't think when I see a Wisconsin poll that shows Biden up 17, I don't believe that. And when I see a Texas poll, Biden up 3, I think that's ridiculous.
Now we did not change my map for those things. I think Trump wins Wisconsin.
Did we have Wisconsin in there?
And so because it leaned that direction, it kind of went that direction. I think Trump wins Wisconsin. And I think Pennsylvania is really the swing, and I think he wins Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, I think Biden wins Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Which is the thing that makes it go. And so my numbers are a little closer than we had said earlier, 277 to, or whatever it is, 302 to 236 is kind of where I would fall. So.
Well, with Wisconsin, that gives it 302 to 236 for Trump.
302, 236. That's what I'm going with.
Okay, so this is now your final answer.
Final answer. Well, because I didn't realize Wisconsin was not one of the ones in play. But go ahead. Now let's do your map.
Oh, any state's in play, Rodney. If you think Trump's going to win California, I can paint that thing red.
No, I think I'm good with the rest of the map. Let's keep this moving.
All right, let's move on to mine. Let's start. Well, I mean, Texas. This is ridiculous talk. Texas obviously goes to Trump. Florida goes to Trump. In fact, if I was confident in any state, I think Trump will definitely win Florida. That is my most confident state. There's a lot of early indications of early voting. Republicans showing strength. I'll leave that aside. I think he also wins Georgia. Also North Carolina. I think he's got Ohio in the bag. I think he's got Iowa in the bag. And this is where it gets hard for me. I'm going to give him Arizona. And I'm going to give him Michigan. State he won in 2016. I don't think he's going to win Wisconsin. I don't believe the plus 17. They have some problems with COVID. I don't think he's going to win there. I thought I flirted with Pennsylvania because of the fracking comments by Joe Biden and some of the recent riots and looting going on in Philadelphia. But they're going to count. Pennsylvania is going to count Biden votes until they get enough they need to go more than Trump. So I've got no
just
confidence.
Keep counting until you get the right number.
Yeah, that's what I think we're going to see there. But I think. You're with me. I think that at least one of these 4 Midwestern states, Trump will win because you've got Wisconsin. And from what I've seen, Michigan seems the most likely. I mean, that could very well be wrong. We don't know. So this final map by me gives Trump 274, Biden 263. Now, I will say this could be. I can see an absolute blowout by Biden. I mean, I think that's. It's either close or a Biden blowout, right? Is that what you think?
No, I just don't see a blowout coming. I do think. Well, okay, and let's talk about what we're discussing here. We're talking about an electoral college blowout.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's going to happen. Could it happen? Yeah, because all you have to do is, of course, win these swing states by a little bit,
exactly.
And you're going to get all of the electoral votes. But I don't.
That's what we saw in 2016.
To win all of them like that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I stepped on you there. Go.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was saying this is exactly what we saw in 2016. I mean, Trump's combined margin in, I believe, those 3 Midwestern states was, I don't know, was it even like 100,000 or 200,000? It was very small.
Yeah, it's really small.
Yeah. Now, I have one last scenario, Rodney, that I think is actually possible.
Okay.
Take a look at this. A 269 tie. Trump takes Michigan, Ohio, Florida, but loses Iowa, loses Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and nabs Maine District number 2. And here we are. And does this not look plausible to you, or is this look ridiculous?
No, that's plausible. I mean, we're so close, right? In
Yeah.
terms of what we're talking, and the margin in the states we're talking about is very close. And so it's clearly possible. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's possible.
Now, in this scenario, the House of Representatives picks the president through it's a one vote per state, and then you got to get a majority of the states, so 26. I don't know how that would shake out. So the way it works,
the Republicans would win it, and so
is that right?
Yeah. Well, if you look at how it goes in terms of the number of states for each one, and to your point, each state gets one vote per the way the electorate falls out, and so that favors Trump.
And in that scenario, the Senate picks the vice president. Yeah. But you don't think we're going there?
I do not, although that would be very fun to me.
So final map.
But I always want the mushy middle. And so what I would love to see is the president go one direction and a split Congress. And so kind of like we have now where, they kind of hold each other accountable because they're split. When we're all one way or the other, that's when things get wonky because there's no check in the system. So.
And the potential for that would be the most likely, well, not most likely. Yeah. So Biden wins and they win the Senate, then he's got all three. And then that's when
for 2 years. And then what tends to happen, just like we saw 2010, 2012, 2016, what tends to happen is then the other party takes back some of Congress in the midterms because everybody's like, wait a second, I didn't expect all that stuff to happen. So
yeah. And it depends really to the degree, probably the House of Representatives is on board with whatever that president's agenda is, because we saw in 2016, Trump held the House, the Senate, and obviously the White House. But the House of Representatives, led by Paul Ryan, was not completely enthused about. And plus, they only had a small majority, so it really does depend how that shakes out, right?
Yep.
All right, so these are our final maps. Rodney, Biden 302, Trump 236, and then Dave, Trump 274. Biden 263. So there we go. We'll be watching. Oh, final prediction, Rodney. Will we have a decision on election night? I know we talked a little bit about this. Might not happen, but
no. And it's not that I think we'll know the numbers on election night, or we'll have enough knowledge. But I think that the different election boards will not call this on election night because they don't want to have egg on their face 2 days later. So I'm thinking we'll know by Wednesday afternoon or Thursday.
Well, what about one thing I have heard is that since so many people have voted by mail, that the actual number to count on election day will make everyone's life easier. And then even if there is, but it will depend on the margins. But say there's 100,000 outstanding ballots, but someone has a 100,001 lead, then we don't have to worry about counting the ballots, right?
True, but you have to look at how the ballots are counted. Some of these swing states, they don't start counting mail-in ballots until election day. And so mail-in ballots are the hardest because they must be scanned versus your ballot, which in most, I don't know if it's everywhere, but certainly in many places where I voted, it's on essentially an iPad. And so it's tabulated. It can be tabulated immediately, although I do know in Texas, they do not tabulate them until election day when they deliver those USB drives, blah, 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 blah. Or they deliver them, I think, after today, which is the last day for early voting. And then on either the day before or on election day is when they plug them into the main system. And so the point is mail-in ballots are harder to count. And if you don't start till election day, it puts you behind when you have millions of them to count.
Oh my goodness. Now I was able to check my ballot has been counted already, which is good to know.
Yeah, good.
So, all right. So thanks.
Now we can move on to anything other than the election.
Yes, this is it. This is hopefully the last time we talk about the election. We've got our final predictions locked in, Rodney. All right, so let's move on here to a big issue, a looming issue, no matter who wins the presidency. I think something that all investors and all Americans should be aware of, that this thing is going on. You've got a story about this on informedamerican.com. World Bank tells U.S. and other major nations to write off debt. As the pandemic has drove economies to shut down, countries around the world have had to deal with a dramatic drop in international trade as well as internal commerce, which means lower tax revenue for countries like U.S., Britain, and those in the European Union. It's been painful, but not unmanageable. Of course, we can borrow from other investors who think we'll pay back, but for developing nations, things aren't so good. Already saddled with lots of debt, these nations don't have cash flowing and can't borrow enough. So they're getting drowned under debt, Rodney. The economies are stagnating. They're not big enough to be able to kind of print enough money or borrow enough money for them to make good. So what do we see? We're seeing World Bank chief economist Carmen Reinhart has a message for G20 nations: write off the debt. So the G20 should move fast to cut off the debt to these countries, or else face an economic lost decade where development slows or even goes in reverse. And as you say at the end here, make no mistakes, governments don't want to take on the debt of failing debtors. They're just a pass-through. It's the taxpayers of the G20 nations who pick up the tab. Rodney, we've been hearing this is not a new thing. Global debt has been a big problem for a while. Advanced economies and developing economies, which is what this article is focusing on, and calls for what people call a debt jubilee, or a massive debt write-down. This is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. What is the likelihood of this happening, and what does this mean for the average Joe in the United States or in Europe?
Well, it's very likely. And, you have small countries that have issued bonds. Typically, they've issued them in dollars or euros because they don't issue them in their local currency because the interest rate's too high. But then they can't get enough of that hard currency to pay it back. We don't think of it here, but it's actually common in other countries where you would say call it Argentina. They're a great example because they go bankrupt all the time.
Okay.
So when they issue bonds, they don't do it in Argentinian whatever. They do it in, I think it's pesos. They do it in, say, US dollars. Well, to pay off the interest and the principal, they have to get US dollars. Well, to do that, they then have to exchange their local currency. But if their local economy is doing poorly, then their currency is failing and they can't get enough US dollars to pay off their interest and their debt. So this is kind of how the mechanism works.
It becomes a trap, basically.
Right. But it's a trap of their own making. I mean, there's no question about this. And so what we have are a lot of countries, the poor countries tend to work on natural resources because that's what they have, right? They're not knowledge based. And so they're mining something, they're extracting something, doing whatever. And so when the economy slows down, we don't need as much of those inputs. And so these economies slow down dramatically. They're not selling stuff into the world market. They're not getting the foreign currency. They can't turn around, get dollars and pay. That's the thing. And so if you hold them to their debts, then what you're going to force them to do is kind of sell off their assets and shrink what they have to pay off this debt, which means they have less that they can count on to move forward going on. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the lost decade comes in, because they're going to have to sell off natural resources to foreign investors. They're going to have to do something to where they can get the money to pay, or you're going to force them to default, at which point they won't be able to borrow later and put that money to use building whatever infrastructure they need to keep doing all the things they do. Mm-hmm. And so what's going to happen is we're going to forgive their debt. Now, debt forgiveness comes in a lot of forms. It's not normally 100%, hey, just don't pay it anymore. You say, hey, don't pay it for 6 or 7 years. Hey, pay a lower interest rate. Or instead of paying it off over 10 years, pay it off over 50 years. And so that burden then transfers from the borrower to the lender. And the lender is us. I mean, it is us, right? We've seen the enemy. It is us. So, we're the ones that end up taking on that responsibility. It's just like student loans. If you tell people who've taken out student loans, hey, don't worry about it, we're going to forgive it. That's not the U.S. government forgiving it. That's legislators saying that on behalf of taxpayers. And so it makes our national debt bigger. And this is at a time when our national debt, of course, is spiraling out of control. What does it mean for people today? Absolutely nothing. What does it mean down the road? It means that we are slowly hemming in our own nation because we can't put as much of our resources toward private industry and growth because we're spending so much money paying off the debt.
Now, what if this is specifically this call specifically is for the richest country of the world to essentially bail out the developing and poorer countries of the world, but rich countries are also saddled with debt, Rodney. You mentioned student loans. There's a 1.6 trillion outstanding. People have credit card debt, auto loans, mortgages. Americans are highly indebted, and many different countries around the world face the same problem. Advanced economies. What if this so-called debt jubilee or debt forgiveness, this idea comes here? I mean, forget bailing out, small country here that's or Argentina or something like that. What if, say, and maybe going back just a bit, just a scenario where, say, Biden takes the presidency, Democrats take the Senate. What if we start seeing calls for that here in the United States to potentially, zero out student loan debt? I mean, that's not implausible to me.
It's not just implausible, it's likely. And so I think that, that we're getting back into the what if scenarios. If Biden wins the presidency, he's going to install a cabinet. And I think you're going to see Elizabeth Warren be Secretary of the Treasury, which, I mean, it is what it is, right? And so you're going to see other people in that cabinet that favor such things, like forgiving all student loan debt of $10,000 or less, which is the bulk of it, right? Most people don't have $200,000 in student loans. That's doctors and lawyers and people who pursue grad school, mostly, not everybody, but mostly. So if you forgave up to $10,000 for everyone that has a loan outstanding, you're going to cover it's between $500 and $600 billion worth of student loans, which then transfers to us. But make no mistake, I don't care who wins the presidency. This is coming. The question is, what does it look like?
Yeah.
The thing that we don't talk about a lot because we can't get our arms around it is rental payments due. Because through the CDC, we have told people you can't be evicted right now. And so what you have are a lot of people who are renting their apartment or whatever it is who are not paying their rent because they're saying that the pandemic has put them in a position where they can't. I'm not arguing that. But it doesn't make that debt go away. They still owe the rent they're not paying. And as it accumulates over 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 months, at the end of this, when they're back to paying, they're going to owe 10 months of rent. And I got a question. If you couldn't pay the rent at the time, do you have 10 months of rent?
No.
Right? And
obviously not.
It's silly. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have landlords out there who have this debt that they're owed by the renter. And they're going to want to collect because they're owed the money. They have their own bills. And so they're then going to take this person to court to say, hey, you have this outstanding debt. And what's the renter going to do? They're going to leave. And they're going to say, I'm not going to rent here anymore. I'm going to go over to this next apartment. And I'm going to tell that landlord, hey, yeah, I didn't pay back rent for 10 months, but I do have this job and I'll pay you. And so we're going to have this huge debt that's going to be traveling around with people, and they're either going to get their credit dinged and have all sorts of issues going forward, or we're going to go through some sort of massive write-off of that sort of thing. And that's what I think is coming.
Yeah. So this is coming now. What can, how does this impact, say, the typical investor? Does this mean they need to hoard gold, buy gold or something like that? And what does this mean? Worries of the dollar going to hell or something like that? I mean, what can be some common sense steps people can kind of prepare themselves? Because as we're seeing, what the taxpayers are going to take all this on, and then how does the U.S. government pay for all this? So,
again, I mean, if it adds another $1 trillion to the economy or to the debt, will anybody notice? I mean, you go from 27 to 28 trillion in the midst of the pandemic spending and everything else. It's going to be a nothing burger on that side. On the consumer side, it makes a difference. If consumers are saddled with this, then they're not going to get credit cards at the same rate that they did before. They're not going to get loans to buy homes like they did before. And so what it's going to do is slow down the economy on the consumption side, but for a very specific group. And so people have been talking about a K-shaped recovery. A V is when we come down and we jump back up, and a W is where it goes down twice and then goes back up. But now a K-shape is where it kind of splits, where people who have higher paying jobs, who kept their job and work remotely, all that stuff, they've been saving money because they're not going to concerts. They're not going on European vacations. They can't do anything, so they got a bunch of cash. They're doing quite well. People who are in service jobs, people who are in frontline jobs, people who don't have as much money saved and can't work remotely, they're not doing well. And so it's going to create much greater inequality in the economy.
We are in an absolutely different world, Rodney. Hopefully we can get through this. It doesn't look very good right now. It seems like it's going to be a while. But we did get some positive news, Rodney. Moving into the big economic news of the week was that U.S. GDP in the third quarter surged 33.1%, better than expected. Now, this is an annualized pace. We don't need to get into that. But there was an estimate of 32%, so beat that. Rodney, this This growth was led largely by residential investment, business spending, and of course, consumer spending, as basically businesses have opened up again. And here we are, Americans looking like they're starting to spend again. So that's certainly good news. We've got some ways to work back to pre-pandemic GDP levels, but this was certainly an encouraging report, Rodney, right?
It was. You mentioned the numbers. They are worth talking about ever so briefly. This follows a 31% decline in the second quarter. And so if just, to make the math simple, if you start at 100 and you lose 30%, you're at 70. If you then gain 30%, you're not back to 100 because 70, plus 130% is 91. Yeah. And so
I'm going to jump in here just to illustrate this point. This is U.S. real gross domestic product. You can see here on this chart, and then here we are.
Right, exactly. And so we've recovered. Yeah. We're not back to where we were.
Right.
We're still 3.5% below where we were before the pandemic, and we're 2.9% lower than we were at this time last year.
Absolutely.
And so those may not sound like big numbers when you're talking about a 31% decline and a 33% recovery. But remember, this is GDP. In the downturn after the financial crisis, we only dropped 3%. And so, we've recovered back to that thing. And so this has been a phenomenal change in economic growth from one quarter to another. And nobody knows where it's going to fall out. But what we do know, and to put that in perspective, we do most things on autopilot. We get up every day. We eat breakfast every day. We pay our bills. Most everybody's paying their bills. And so the consumption and spending that we do on autopilot remains the same. It's that marginal spending that changes that can make a difference.
Well, something else that changed, Rodney, interesting thing is that government spending was down. And government spending is a calculation into GDP. This is the way we calculate GDP. Government spending is a contributor to that. We did not have a second stimulus. And we're looking at basically, if we want to talk about making up that gap to where we were, at least just to get back to even, it's a little under $1 trillion, Rodney. And so if there was a second stimulus, one that was, $2-3 trillion, and not all that money goes out the door immediately, but that could have actually, based on the formula of GDP, we would have been back to that level, wouldn't we?
We would have. It's not business spending. Those are transfer payments that are then spent by individuals. And so it would have boosted personal consumption a little bit more. And so we would have gotten closer, and not all the money is spent at one time. So some portion of the stimulus that went out during the summer, and some portion of the federal unemployment benefits were spent over the third quarter as well, because people do spread it out. But yeah, it definitely would have added to it. Now,
looking ahead to the fourth quarter, we certainly don't expect to see another giant pop like this. This was actually a little bit of that light switch economy that we've heard doesn't exist. So, but it actually does to a certain extent, because what it essentially is you shut down the businesses so they close, and when you reopen them, people spend again. But it's not enough to get all the way back yet. But looking ahead to the fourth quarter, got holiday spending coming on, and I got a story here. Well, this is from Gallup, is that they say Americans plan on spending less in the holiday season than they did last year. So that could be a sign of worry, couldn't it?
It could, but we have more people. We keep adding to our adult population because the millennials are adding into the economy at a much faster rate than the boomers are passing. And so I don't know that this is indicative of lower overall holiday spending. I've seen estimates anywhere from down 8% to up 1%. And so again, it's one of those things that's just, people don't know yet. Because on the flip side, you have people who have a lot of money and haven't been able to spend it. And do they go a bit more lavishly this year just because they can't? If they can't travel because you're going to see not as many people get together on holidays, do they send a bigger gift? Yeah. I think the airlines are the ones who are in trouble over Christmas. I think Best Buy and Amazon are going to be, rolling then in the dough. So
will GDP at the end of the year be negative or positive for 2020?
Negative, no question.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that downer. Ron, I got two quick things I want to hit before we get out of here. Last week we talked about, I posed you the question, is it over for Netflix, where they had stalling subscriber growth? And one of the solutions we had, because they have such a massive subscriber base, was what? To raise prices. Got a story here from CNBC. Netflix raises prices on standard and premium plans. They're bumping up. It looks like about $1 each. Or $1 for the medium plan, and then for the premium one with 4K, I believe, is going up $2 to $17.99. What do you make of this? Just another prediction, or what?
Yeah, that's what I've been talking about with Netflix for over a decade, right? Every time somebody thinks they're in trouble, all they have to do is raise their price by $1. They're still under $20. We're sticky as consumers. We don't like to change. We have to learn a new password. That's the hardest part of all this, is learning a new idiot login and password. And so, so it's another $1. It's another $2 until it, is over $20. Yeah. I don't think anybody's paying attention. And arguably rightfully so, right? Because if you're watching this with any consistency and it goes up by $1 and you spread that across the hours that you're watching it, if you're watching 20 hours a month, which is not a stretch, you're talking about a nickel. And so per hour. And so it's not a thing. Yeah, but it sure helps them.
We have The Office and I have Star Trek on a loop essentially at the house. So yeah, I did that. That was
which Star Trek, because that says something about your personality.
The original series.
Oh, of course. Okay.
And I like The Next Generation. Anyways, yeah, I was going to ask you the other question. I was going to ask you where the pain point was. So you think it's about $20?
I do. I don't think people pay attention before that.
All right. Final thing, Rodney. Here we talk about how we break through the mainstream media box, and there's nothing more mainstream than the Associated Press. And this whole thing about fact checking, Rodney, this has become a little cottage industry profession that is quite silly. And I think this is a great illustration of its silliness. Story here from AP News. Biden did not eulogize former KKK Grand Wizard. Now, this is referring to former Senator Robert Byrd. He says a widely shared post on Facebook claims when he died in 2010, former KKK Grand Wizard Robert Byrd was eulogized by Joe Biden. Go ahead, Facebook fact checkers, verify this. I dare you. Here's where our mainstream media, Rodney, they really step in to clarify things for Americans. But this post is misleading. Byrd never held the post of Grand Wizard in the Ku Klux Klan, a top leadership role, though he was a member of the organization in the early 1940s. As a young man, Byrd recruited members to a local KKK chapter and was elected to the post of Exalted Cyclops, Rodney. So this post is clearly false. Robert Byrd was never a Grand Wizard of the KKK. He was merely an exalted Cyclops. I can't believe this election misinformation is being spread on social media. What is Mark Zuckerberg going to do about this, Rodney?
Hopefully he's going to tell both sides to go away, because yes. Robert Byrd has been dead for more than a decade, and this does not matter, right? And so it's something that he did in the 40s. And so here we are, almost 80 years later,
talking about it,
using this as, a bludgeoning instrument to beat on people about politics today. I am not defending the AP. I'm not defending Facebook or any of the fact checkers, because I can take issue with a lot of them. I'm saying that we've gotten to a point where people can go online and make these outrageous statements for no other reason than getting a reaction, which wastes all of our time. And so that's the big ripoff here. You and I are being ripped off for our time as these people use this to bludgeon each other, and it just sucks up all the oxygen in the room.
Yes. Although I would argue the mainstream media is trying to bludgeon us, or at least tell us that we're stupid this was...
no question.
This whole fact-checking thing, the substance was correct, but you got a detail wrong, so false. Okay, great. Well, that's all we have this week, Rodney. We are next time we'll talk, we may have a new president-elect, so we'll see what happens there. Besides the election, as I encourage everyone here to share this video if you're watching it on Facebook, comment down below. Let us know what you think of the stories. What is your prediction for the presidential election? Do you have if you've made a map? Go ahead and share that to us in the comments down below. Share this video with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to this channel. But looking ahead, Rodney, as we want everyone to go to informedamerican.com, what kind of stories can they expect to find in their email if they sign up for our free email newsletter? Anything besides the election that you've got your eye on?
Well, I mean, COVID-19 is the thing. We talk about the election and it is important. I believe that the markets will breathe a sigh of relief once the election is over because investors don't like uncertainty. But you have to, watch the financial markets, and you've been watching this, volatility, downward volatility happening lately. And people are worried that we're headed to another lockdown because that's already going on.
Yeah.
Here in Texas, the city of El Paso shut down for 2 weeks because their hospitals are essentially full for critical care. They're airlifting patients out for COVID-19. France is instituting a house lockdown. You're supposed to stay home except for essential work starting at, I believe, 5 p.m. And I think it goes for 2 weeks, if not a month. Germany's doing this. And so people are worried we're going to return to something like that, which could lead to another difficult down leg in the economy.
Great. Rodney, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for watching. We'll catch you next week, hopefully with an election answer. We'll see. We'll see what all goes on. Thanks all for watching. Remember to get informed, America.
You've been listening to Get Informed, America, brought to you by the Informed American Radio Network. Please like and subscribe today in order to get new exclusive weekly episodes. Any questions, thoughts, or comments can be sent directly to info@informedamerican.com. And don't forget to visit informedamerican.com to keep up with real, smart news. Until next time, fight fake news and find common ground.